Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Austin and I'm a young makeup artist just doing my best. So today we actually have something kind of exciting. We are not going to be doing makeup because I have my little boy beat on today. We're going to be talking about Forgive Me Father. This is my second book that I have coming out hopefully soon. I sent it into a few publishers, so I'm waiting to hear back up from them, and then I can start, like really promoting it. But I decided this time we are going to be doing like just a short reading, talk about, like the plot, the characters, where the story kind of came from. And then I'm going to be doing a little reading of chapter 1 for you guys to kind of, entice my audience, All right, so let's get into it. All right, are we all comfortable? Yeah? All right. Forgive Me Father is a contemporary coming-of-age fiction about two boys, Daniel and Emilio, my little babies, and how they kind of just, by fate, by God, by whatever you happen to believe in, whatever they happen to believe in, like, they were able to find each other and meet each other and kind of, like, grow up together in spite of this kind of suffocating societal pressure that kind of surrounded them. So I'm gonna go in and read like the back, kind of the synopsis. Underneath the constellations, we find Emilio and Daniel. They're just laying still, existing amongst the glittering stars on Earth, fireflies. They glow, they flicker on and off, a million shades of yellow, orange, and green. I wonder what it would be like to be one of them, Daniel said, looking over at the other boy, the pale moonlight reflected in his gray eyes, a sliver of cobalt blue shimmering brightly. A firefly, Emilio asked, meeting gray with brunette. Yeah, wouldn't it be amazing to be a firefly? To always show your light on the outside. What if we looked at someone and we were like, whoa, that person's blue. They must be calm and collected. Or like, wow, a green person. They must be really in tune with nature. It would be amazing to just live your true self on the outside. Let's do it, Danny. Let's be fireflies. Okay, Emmy. Let's do it. Underneath the gentle glow of the starlight, the boys' fingers find each other amongst the blades of grass and hold on, their heartbeats synchronized with the steady flicker of the lightning bugs. So yeah, that kind of captures the general vibe. So yeah, I don't exactly know when I kind of had this idea for this story. It just came to me in the middle of the night. I'm really intrigued as a writer to not necessarily write narratives, but like really emphasize like important scenes and important moments. That's kind of what this novel is. It's a collection of really important scenes and really important moments that feel so realistic to the individual and to the reader, because we've all had those moments where we're with someone and it feels like you're the only two people in the universe. All right, let's get started with the introduction. Hi, my name is Emilio, and this is my story. This is the story of how I met Daniel, a boy who changed my life. This is every infinite moment we spent together, those which will forever live on in my heart. This is the story of our lives, and this is the story of how we lived. Daniel taught me many things, but the one thing I cherish more than anything is how he taught me to show who I am. Daniel taught me to be a firefly, burning bright with my true colors showing. If you care enough to read our story, I simply ask that you try to become a firefly too. All right. Chapter 1, Genesis. This is the story of a boy. No, this is the story of two boys, and of how they taught each other to live in a world that gave them no reason to. This is a story of loneliness, and this is a story of togetherness. This is both a story of condemnation and one of acceptance. This is a story of Emilio and Daniel. I only knew what Daniel told me about his life, about his story. I also know how I felt, how we felt together. I can recall every salty tear and every sweet touch, but I'll talk about that later. Where I want to start is how it all began, how the universe or God or whomever or whatever came to weave Daniel and I's paths together. None of it would have happened had a man named Edgar Phillips decided not to pine after the secretary of his auto parts company. If he'd not fallen for her attempts to get a raise, then maybe his family, a beautiful wife and 2 loving sons, wouldn't have left without so much as a goodbye, hurrying to the bus station where they would ride until it stopped at nightfall in a little town called Casper. There, the wife and her 2 sons exited the bus and stayed in a motel for the night. That's also where she met Mrs. Owens, the friendly caretaker of the motel, and where she learned of a job opening at a cafe in town. They're always needing new people. The waitresses there are either lazy or mean, so they keep firing them in hopes of getting better ones. She smiled a toothy grin that revealed a few metal fillings. Don't tell anyone you heard that from me. Then the wife, who'd shed her husband's surname and now went by her maiden name, Lucia Maldonado, applied for the position at the cafe and was very quickly hired. Her desire to create a life for her boys meant taking as many shifts as possible, which also meant that her eldest, Emilio Maldonado, who decided to take Lucia's name as well, had to learn how to care for his little brother when his mother wasn't able. He didn't mind. He knew that his mother was only gone so often because she was trying to do her best for them. Nevertheless, sometimes he wondered what it would have been like to have grown up properly, to have enjoyed his childhood. I grew up sooner than I was supposed to. Mama didn't have enough money to pay for a sitter, and I knew that. I learned how to cook after many failed attempts at creating grilled cheeses. And I learned how to make my baby brother Angel stop crying. I learned what each of his cries meant. I still remember the ones that meant he was hungry or thirsty or tired, and just because he wanted to be a needy little brat. But I loved him for it nonetheless. Finally, as fate would have it, Mama met a man, a real one, with kind brown eyes and a smile that felt genuine. His name was Richard Johnson. They went out a couple of times when Mama wasn't working or spending time with us. She and he had a great time, she said. Mama, when you and Richie go out more and fall in love, you won't forget about Angel and me, right? Emilio, let me tell you something. Some people believe that love is like a jar, and you can only fill it up so much until the jar is full. I believe that love is like a tree. It starts out so little, and slowly, with enough care, it grows to be full and majestic. That tree's roots stretch so far into the earth, and those branches push so far into the sky, that there isn't any possible way that one thing can take up too much space on it. I love you and Angel Emilio, more than anything in my entire life. You two are my saviors, and I love you so much. But I am also starting to love Richie. Is that okay with you? Are you fine with somebody else sharing a branch of my love? Mama, all I want is for you to be happy. I remember crying and hugging her so hard. She cried too, because that was as big of a moment for her as it was for me. I decided that Richie was a good guy, and he deserved a chance to help my mama understand what love felt like again. The years passed quickly. Angel and I grew up. Mama kept working at the cafe because she loved the people. She loved talking to Mary, a teacher at the local middle school, and to Stuart, a man who got out of bed every day in order to mow the lawns of the people of Casper. Angel and I would meet her at the cafe after school every day. Sometimes we would put on little aprons and help bust the tables so that they were ready for people to sit down. Richie eventually came to move in with us. We stayed at our home for a while, a year maybe. But then we came to a unanimous decision that the apartment was too small for the 4 of us. Richie managed to talk my mama into moving into a lovely little house a couple blocks down. The only reason she said yes was because he assured her that it wasn't far from the cafe that she'd grown to love so dearly. Richie left his little apartment, and we left ours, and then we moved in the new little blue house on Birch Street. I still remember the first time we walked in. Angel and I were super excited to have our own rooms. I don't know what caused me to choose the room on the right, the one that faced the road. Maybe it was the universe, or God, or that whomever or whatever I talked about earlier. But nonetheless, I stepped in and immediately knew, this is it, my room. We'd barely been in our new house an hour before a knock at our door caused my curiosity to grow. Who could that possibly be? Angel and I both looked out from our rooms, then at each other. We hurriedly ran down the stairs, almost toppling over each other. I remember smiling when I first opened the door, but believe me when I say that that smile did not last long. It disappeared as soon as I looked up to the man who towered in our doorway. He was wearing a white button-up with a simple black tie under a suit jacket. In retrospect, he really wasn't that tall, but as a 13-year-old kid, he was pretty big. At his side was a woman with pretty brown curls and a dress, and two kids, a boy and a girl. The boy looked like he was around my age. He had brown hair and freckles, with gray eyes like his parents. The girl was the strange one. She had hair that looked like a fire, and eyes that were a wild, lively green. Mama and Richie quickly arrived at the door, and the man introduced him and his family. Hello, I'm Pastor Andrew of the church down the road. This is my wife, Sarah, and these are our children, Daniel and Molly. We're the Millers. Welcome to Casper, neighbors. My mama replied to him with a nervous smile. Hello, thank you. I'm Lucia Maldonado. These are my boys Emilio and Angel, and this is my boyfriend Richard. It's very nice to meet you. At the word boyfriend, Pastor Andrew's face scrunched up a bit. Ah, so you two aren't married then? And the boys? They're for my ex-husband. I left him a few years ago. It seemed as though the man didn't approve of this very much. At the time, I couldn't pick up on his disapproving tones, and even now I don't know if it was because my mother was the one talking to him, or if it was because she'd left my father, or if it was because she'd been living with Richie before they were married. But looking back, in the span of 3 minutes he'd been in our presence, he'd already decided my mother's place in this town, and by extension, Angel's and my own. The one thing I remembered most is little Daniel Miller. I remembered him looking up at his father first to make sure he wasn't paying attention to him, and he smiled at me. He had a great smile, a bit toothy when he was younger, but it was always his. He was the kind of person that would smile all the time if given the chance, and he would always cause you to smile in return. My mother and his father hadn't chatted much longer. He left rather hurriedly, his family close behind him. I remembered Daniel as he turned around to look at me again, smiling. He quickly waved at me before he turned back to follow his father. Our family, meanwhile, closed the front door and remarked on how odd that encounter was. People talk about Pastor Andrew all the time down at the cafe, but I certainly wasn't expecting that, Mama said to Richie. She turned to my brother and me. Who's ready for supper? When I went to school the following Monday, I looked for Daniel everywhere. He seemed to be my age, therefore he should have been in my grade, but I couldn't find him. I looked for the familiar head of brunette in all of my classes, but to no avail. It wasn't until my last class of the day, choir, when I found his stormy gray eyes and freckles in the mass of boys and girls. I hurriedly went to stand beside him, but the only space left was the one in front of him. Luckily, I was short enough that the director had no problem with me being in front of him. The class started to warm up as the director played the piano. Hi, a voice spoke in my ear. I turned around and Daniel was smiling at me again. Hi, I replied. Without thinking, I immediately asked him what I'd been wondering all day. Why haven't I seen you around today? What grade are you in? He smiled again. I'm in 8th, same as you, but I go to another school for most of my academics. Then I come here for art and choir. Oh, I didn't know why I felt, well, I don't really know. All I knew is that I didn't like that he didn't spend all of his time here. Why don't you just go to one school? Wouldn't that be easier? It would, but I don't want to give up my arts programs that the public school offers, and my parents don't want to take me out of the advanced academic programs that this private school up the road offers. So I'm stuck moving back and forth for now. Less talking, more warming up, the director, Mrs. Dahlia, told us. Daniel and I quickly flashed our best, sorry, smiles, and she rolled her eyes with a grin. I started to sing with the rest of the class. I felt a warmth near my ear again. Want to hang out after school today? We can get to know each other. I turned to face Daniel once again. I liked his freckles. They brought out his happy eyes. I'd love to. I'll meet you at my locker after school, number 204. Warm-ups! And after school we met. I saw him walking toward me down the hall, his black and white bag on his back. It was kind of like a movie. I saw him move in slow motion. I watched as his smile stretched to the edges of his mouth. I loved that smile. He leaned his head against the blue locker, his brown hair pushed against the metal. His brown hair brushed against the metal. His gray eyes were just a bit different than the rest of his family's. Upon closer inspection, I could see a little streak of cobalt blue tucked neatly in each iris. It was like a strip of blue sky in an otherwise stormy forever. "Amelia?" He smiled at me, and I blushed ever so slightly. I don't really know why at the time. "Ready to go?" He laughed. I nodded and grabbed my bag, an overstuffed one marked in a clean arrangement of blue, red, and yellow. I was a fan of primary colors, something my family had never really understood. We started walking down the halls. He took strides, like he wasn't afraid of anything, like the world was his if he really wanted it, and really, it was. Later that day, we went to the park, also just down the street from the school. The perks of living in a small town, I guess. We'd take turns pushing each other on the swings, and sometimes we'd both sit and talk, gently swaying. He loved the monkey bars, which I never quite understood. He said it made him feel like he was a kid. "When I'm up there," he said, "I feel like I'm just allowed to act like a child, because that's all I'm supposed to be. I don't have to be the pastor's kid or the teacher's pet or the friend to all. I'm just allowed to be a 13-year-old. Nothing more." Then we found our spot, a small nook below the wooden playground. It was like a tree house, but on the ground, so as to cause less injury to young children. We sat there alone, in silence for a little bit. I asked Daniel what he liked to do, and he smiled when he told me that he loved drawing. He grabbed his bag and unzipped it, showing me the inside. Every inch was covered in black ink. He pulled out a pair of white sneakers that had been colored with various markers and turned into a beautiful piece of artwork. Well, as beautiful as any piece a 13-year-old's artwork could be. It was there in that little nook where we had many of our firsts. But again, I'll talk about that later. At this moment in our lives, this is where Daniel and I first learned how to talk to each other. We declared this place Amelia and Daniel's sanctuary, a place of solitude and tranquility amidst a world of uneasiness and arguments. It was there that Daniel first told me about his life and about his feelings. I feel trapped, like I'm stuck in a movie, but also like I'm watching my life play out in front of me. I feel like I have no control over what happens before the end credits roll, and that terrifies me, Emmy. I don't like leaving my fate in the hands of my parents, of my father. Then don't. You don't have to fulfill the prophecy of being the perfect golden boy that they dreamed of. You're allowed to have dreams too, Daniel. You have to be the one to create your destiny. You have to be the one to believe in yourself and take a chance. Well, that conversation didn't end up turning out well for Daniel, or maybe it did, eventually. One day, he went home and thought about what I'd said. He'd told his father that he wanted to start taking art classes, and that the first one coming up was the coming Sunday after church. Sundays are days of rest, not for silly hobbies. It's a time to be with family and delve into our worship. Please, Dad? It would just be for an hour, maybe 2 at the most. It's over at the school. I like drawing, and I want to get better at it. I said no. That's final. Whatever I say goes, okay? That's really when Daniel first began to crack. The first sliver in a mirror that would eventually shatter. He started yelling at his father, telling him how hard he'd tried to be the perfect son and student and person, all for him. Also that he wouldn't feel ashamed when they went in public. Daniel became the epitome of a good Christian boy in order to keep his father's image alive. Daniel told his father that he'd only wanted to have this one thing that he could really be happy about. He wanted to express himself and draw and do something that he thought he was good at. Daniel was angry and he ran out of the house. Later, he found himself at the door to the blue home across the street. He knocked twice, once rather softly, and another time just a bit louder. He was crying, in a mixture of anger and sadness. A kind woman named Lucia answered and quickly brought the boy inside when she saw his tears. "What's wrong, Daniel?" she asked him, and he told her what had transpired. Can I stay the night, Mrs. Maldonado? I really don't want to see my father tonight. You can stay for as long as you'd like, Daniel. Emilio is upstairs. Daniel started walking away to go see his friend. Mama's hand quickly grabbed onto his arm. And Daniel, if you need anything, don't be afraid to ask. Our home is your home. She smiled, and Daniel came closer to hug her. He thanked her and walked up the stairs to see 2 rooms. Once again, the universe nudged him to choose the door on the right. He'd carefully pushed it open, finding a teenage boy sleeping on blue sheets under a red blanket. Daniel walked in and looked around the room, and then back to a comfortable, sleeping Emilio. He never told me exactly what went through his mind that night, and I'm left only to imagine. Whatever he felt, he also knew that he needed comfort and peace as well. Something drove him to pull off his trousers and t-shirt and climb into the bed beside the other boy. It was an experience that was new and strange and warm all at the same time. I hadn't woken up when Daniel crawled under the thick blanket. As he told me, I only shivered slightly as the colder air hit me. I do remember, though, that once his skin hit mine, however briefly, I did wake up for a moment. Danny, what are you doing here? I asked him groggily. I had a fight with my dad, he told me. It's okay. You can stay for as long as you'd like. Good night, Danny. Good night, Emmy. There was a bit of space between us, but I soon closed it off when I shifted and put my arms around him. After that, I didn't move. He made me feel comfortable, and according to Daniel, he hadn't been far behind me in falling to sleep. There's something strangely beautiful about a room, about a bed and covers, about the peace that comes with it. There's something about the small pleasures we indulge in when we're in the most comforting and common of places. There's something beautiful about being able to hold someone in the dark while the night drags onward. Though that's also the tragic thing about the night. Soon enough, the sun comes up, and it's morning. And with the morning comes those covers of peace and that bed of comfort. Reality crashed down upon us in the room of tranquility, and we found ourselves looking at each other. Eyes of gray and brown, both of us confused about what this meant. Confused because of how at peace we were when we were in each other's arms, but also scared now that we weren't. Luckily, I had my guardian Angel watching over me. My little brother bounded into the room with the energy of 6 boys. He loved when we had company. He jumped onto the bed and stepped onto my leg, which then led to my bedroom becoming the place where I would attempt to assassinate him by means of excessive tickling. Daniel, help me, Angel giggled with his high-pitched squeals of laughter. Daniel laughed, but offered no assistance. I let go and let Angel hurry off to help Mama with breakfast. And make sure to wash your hands, I yelled after him. I exited the warmth of my red blanket and started to get ready for the day, when I remembered that I had a guest, and also that I was wearing nothing but my boxer briefs. My cheeks flushed with embarrassment, and I hurriedly grabbed a light blanket to wrap around me. Daniel just chuckled at that. You do realize that I was next to you the entire night while you were wearing only those, right? I blushed again, remembering how we woke up with my arms around him. Yeah, but it's morning now. You can see me much better. He rolled his eyes and smiled that smile. You're a strange one, Emmy. He stood and stretched out his limbs. The light from the window poured into my room. He stood right in front of it, and it made him seem so angelic. The rising sun's redness coated his skin like a ruby glaze. His body was pale. It seemed like his entire body was the same shade of white. The sun's glow made his brunette hair shine with a faint redness, and his eyes seemed darker than normal. I don't know why I felt like that, why I was suddenly seeing him in a new light, literally and figuratively. Emmy? He smiled again, and I blushed after realizing that I'd been staring for a while. Do you have a shower I can use? I nodded and led him down the hall to the one beside Angel's room. I'll go help them finish breakfast while you shower, okay? There are clothes in the closet of my room. You can borrow some. He thanked me and closed the door. I let out a heavy sigh and then cursed myself silently for being so loud. I heard the water turn on and walked downstairs to help Angel, Richie, and Mama with breakfast. I'd almost forgotten that I was wearing neither pants nor a shirt until Mama looked up at me and smirked. "You slept like that? With Daniel?" I blushed, but brushed it off. "Well, I fell asleep first, and then you let him in, so..." I took on the task of setting the table. Angel was the true chef of the family, loving to create new and tasty dishes, while I took the position of his best critic. "Whatever you say, Emilio." Mama smiled again. I finished helping set up and walked back upstairs, catching Daniel pulling on my clothes with the door to my bedroom open. Why does this confuse me? I couldn't figure out why seeing him like this made me blush. It never happened when I used to play sports and was in the locker room with the other boys. It never happened with Angel when I had to share a room and we'd dress in front of each other. It was just Daniel. He finished dressing. He chose my white clothes, a white t-shirt, white shorts, and even a pair of white socks. I didn't mind. I wasn't ever a fan of my white socks, and the rest of it I was glad to let him borrow. I entered and grabbed some clothes from my closet and smiled at him once before I escaped to the bathroom to shower. Maybe if I cleaned myself, I'd be rid of these strange feelings. The water helped un poco. A little. Afterward, I stepped into my clothes. A black sweater and jeans of the same shade. I felt like the yin to Daniel's yang, and also felt necessary to dress the part. I don't understand what's been going on with me. I looked into the slightly fogged up mirror. Who are you? I am Emilio Maldonado, son of Lucia Maldonado and brother to Angel. I spoke out loud. I love to sing. I love music in general. I am not a good chef, but I love to help Angel whenever I can. I love my family, and they support me. I take a breath. I don't like Daniel. Not like that. He's a friend, yes. He's my best friend in Casper. Maybe even the world. I don't have feelings for him. Once my internal-external struggle had come to a close, I decided to join the rest of the family for breakfast. I left the bathroom and saw Daniel sitting in my bed, crying. I quietly walked into my room, closed the door, and sat beside him. He looked at me for a moment and began to cry again. I wrapped my arms around him and held him close. His head nuzzled into my chest, and he just seemed to release. I'm just so tired. I'm tired of being the golden boy. I'm tired of acting so perfect all the time. All I wanted to do was the one thing that I enjoy. I'm sorry, Danny. I don't know what to say. I know, Emmy. I'm sorry for unloading all this on you. I know that you probably would rather not know about my troubles. I used my finger to tilt his head toward me. The tears made his eyes look like jewels, like beautiful, tragic jewels. You can talk to me about anything, Daniel. I'm here for you if you need anything. I'll always be here for you. He smiled at me. Those jewels stared into my own, less sparkly ones. Then he hugged me, a complete and total embrace. Then I hugged him back. It was a moment, perfect and infinite, at least in memory. I guess that's what moments are like in the end. We remember them as infinities, when in reality they're but a few seconds. But how beautiful those few seconds are. Boys, Mama called up to us. We broke apart, but Daniel kept smiling. Breakfast is ready. We'll be right down, Mrs. M. Daniel yelled back. I love the dusting of freckles he had on his face. They brought out his perfect skin and his diamond-esque eyes. He stood and held his hand out to me, helping me to my feet. Then he smiled again and we walked down the stairs into the dining room/kitchen. It's a big enough room to hold both, so there was a wooden table set to the left with lit candles and a light blue tablecloth. Then to the right was the kitchen, with white cabinets and a gray polished stone countertop. Daniel and I took our seats across from Angel. Once we were settled in, we all bowed our heads and reached our hands out to each other. Daniel looked confused. It's how my family prays before I meal. Here, just hold on to my hand. He smiled uneasily and took my hand. Mama spoke up to begin the prayer. Thank you, Lord, for all that you have given us. Thank you for this food that we are about to receive. Thank you for this wonderful new life you've given us in Casper. And thank you for my beautiful boys. Also, thank you for allowing little Daniel to spend a safe night under the Maldonado roof. We're very happy to have him here, and we're very happy that he's decided to be friends with Emilio. Thank you for all of our blessings. Amen. We all let go of each other's hands, and Daniel immediately entwines his fingers, lost in his own prayer. We waited until he was finished. It would be rude to interrupt one's prayer. He opened his eyes and blushed. It's how my family begins every meal. I didn't want to push it onto you, but I didn't feel right going without it. That's perfectly fine, sweetie, Mama said, smiling. I wouldn't stop you from your way of worship just because you're in my home. Feel free to express yourself as much as you'd like while you're here. We began to eat, each of us complimenting Angel on a dish well done. The kid loved his spices, though. Sometimes I would avoid the eggs for that very reason. Daniel seemed to love everything. He ate at a moderate pace, always making sure he was the perfect gentleman when he needed something. After breakfast was finished, I wondered what we would do next. Daniel had been here for more than 10 hours, and I wondered if he was planning on returning home anytime soon. Not that I didn't enjoy his company, I was just curious. Hey, Danny, I whispered. He turned to look at me, eyes open wide, his mouth full with one of Angel's signature cinnamon rolls. He swallowed, but continued to give me that wide-eyed look. Yes? When were you planning on going home? I don't want you to, but I was curious if you were ready to make up with your father or not. I could see that I touched a sore spot when Daniel looked away and began to stare at the leftovers of his breakfast. I don't know, Emmy, he said. I want to draw and paint and sketch. He doesn't care about that. He doesn't care what I want after all I've done for him. I'll go back when I feel like he's ready to understand, as long as that's okay with your family. Mama would do anything to make sure someone was able to follow their dreams. She's kind of like a fairy helping someone find their happily ever after. I'm sure she'd be fine with it, and I'm definitely fine with it. I promised I'd be there for you, and I don't intend to break that promise. Thank you, Emmy. He smiled again. I pledged that I would do whatever it took to keep him smiling because it was so beautiful. It was so Daniel. So, boys, Richie smiled. What's the plan for the day? He and Mama looked at each other and smiled before their attention was returned to us. We have to take Angel into the city for some new shoes now that we have some extra cash, so we'll be gone for most of the day. We should be back in time for summer, though. I'm gonna get stuff to make a cheesecake, Angel said excitedly. Would you rather have chocolate or raspberry, Daniel? Hey, what about me? I thought I was your critic, I spoke up. Yeah, but Daniel is our guest, so he gets to choose. I have a feeling you'll be into the same thing anyway, he said. Chocolate, Daniel replied. Always chocolate. Angel smiled, as did I. I pegged you for a chocolate kind of guy. I'm super excited, my first cheesecake. Angel hurried up the stairs and into his room to grab his supplies. It was really just a bunch of note cards that he wrote recipes on in his trusty cookbook, written by a local woman who also happened to be his English teacher. Angel loved her to death, and the feeling was mutual. She agreed to come over once to help him with his hollandaise sauce and his souffle, which he'd been having trouble with. She was going to teach Mama some stuff too, so she could cook with Angel as a bonding activity. Daniel and I decided what to do, just as my brother leaped from the final step onto the floor. We're going to go to the park. Is that okay? We'll be safe, I asked Mama. Her ever-present smile was still on her face. Of course. Just be sure to call me if you need anything, or if something's wrong. Make sure you two stay together. There's money in the drawer for pizza or something for lunch. Have fun, you two. I love you, Emilio, she said as she and the rest of the family left the blue house to drive away toward the city. Not but an hour away, however, still seeming like light years from the small town. Daniel and I walked to the park and sat on the swings. We both pushed forward so that we weren't swinging so much as swaying. He thought about his problems, and I confronted myself about mine. These unexpected feelings came to me at the strangest moments, and I didn't know how to deal with them. How do you deal with the feeling when you don't know exactly what it is or why it's there? I shook my head and asked Daniel if he wanted to spend some time in the sanctuary. He smiled and nodded. Then we both got up and entered our little nook, the small corner of the world that was just ours. We neglected to acknowledge the names of couples scratched into the wood. Some say ignorance is bliss, and perhaps that's exactly what was being executed that day, until it wasn't. Let's do that, I said. What? He laughed. Let's carve our names into this wood so that it'll be here forever, even after we aren't. He laughed again. You know that it won't be here forever, right? Either the wood will rot, or the park will be taken down, or both. But our names carved into this castle won't last forever. You're right, I admitted. But isn't even a small portion of forever worth the chance of us being rotted away? So that someone will see this one day and ask themselves, who is Daniel? Was he a brave but tortured artist? Did he fight for everything he had and love with everything in his body? Then they would say, and what about Emilio? Was he even braver, even stronger? Was he able to cause those around him to want to be brave? Did he bring the best out of even the worst people? Was he the best friend anyone could ask for? Did he love in a way that was unapologetic? Because you should never, ever apologize for loving someone. We looked at each other, two teenagers with our heads swirling with emotions and feelings. We stared a moment longer. Just another moment. Just another infinite moment. Then we broke apart and my gaze returned to the wall of names. That's a smart someone, whoever they are. Yeah, they are. He cuddled up close to me and we lay there on the ground, under the wooden palace, inside of Emilio and Daniel's sanctuary. We fell asleep together in our special place. When we woke up, my stomach grumbled slightly. Danny, I whispered to him. I nudged him gently and he stirred. Yeah, Emmy? He smiled up at me and I melted inside. He looked so safe and vulnerable in that moment. Want to go get some lunch? He nodded and sat up, stretching his arms out. His hair was sticking up in the back. I reached out and helped him put it back into place. We exited our little nook and started walking down Redwood Street, the road that held the church, the public school, the private school, and intersected with Birch Street, our street. There were kids our age that walked with their parents, kids that I'd only spoken to once or twice. The young people around here weren't used to seeing a boy with skin the color of mine. It made me different, but that's okay. If I was just like them, then maybe I would have found someone else, and I wouldn't have met Daniel. And I wouldn't give up my memories of Daniel for anything in the world. The two of us walked into Flashback, the cafe where my mama worked. As soon as we seated ourselves, we were greeted by our waitress, Crystal. Hi, boys. Emilio, how's your mother? I haven't been able to work when she's on her shift. I haven't seen her in a while. She's doing very well, thanks for asking. She's in the city right now shopping with Angel and Richie for new shoes. How are Caleb and Leah? Oh, they're doing very well. It's tough working here all the time and still taking care of the babies, but it's so worth it. How about you, Daniel? How's Molly? How's Sarah doing? They're busy. They're well, but busy. Molly's involved in the student council, so she's working on planning the 7th, 8th grade formal. Plus, she's picked up the flute and is trying to learn how to play it. Mrs. Dahlia has been doing lessons with her so she can learn. Mom's been trying to meet with her women's Bible study group every week, and she's gone for other meetings sometimes too, so she's just busy going around and trying to build support for Dad's plan to enhance the church. What do you mean, enhance the church? I asked. Well, Dad's been trying to encourage the development committees in the town hall to pass his plans of renovating the church and doubling it in size. He wants to allow as many newcomers to come as possible. He wants to be able to preach on a larger stage to a larger audience and possibly bring in people from other churches. I don't know. But that's all he and Mom talk about now. Daniel shook his head and looked down. All right, enough jibba-jabba. What would you guys like to eat? After we ordered, Daniel and I talked more. About his father, the rest of his family. We talked about whatever made him the happiest. You said that you like to draw, right? That's what caused all this stuff with your dad to happen? He nodded. Well, why haven't you shown me anything yet? I've been with you almost an entire day. I mean, I've seen your bag, but not any actual pieces. Show me something. He looked nervous, or maybe shy. He turned around the placemat that he'd been messing with the entire time. On it was a sketch of me, an almost realistic sketch of me. I was looking into his eyes while I casually sipped my lemonade. He even made my eyes sparkle a bit, which is an exaggeration, but a flattering one. Wow. That's all there was to say about it. It was impeccable. Daniel, meanwhile, had turned to look out the window. his pale cheeks red with embarrassment. "Is it bad?" he asked, still watching out the glass. "Daniel, this is amazing. You've got real talent." He blushed even more when I said this. I don't even know what to say, which was good because at that moment, Crystal came to us with our entrees. I settled the bill with her and tipped well. Mom always told me to tip well because you never know whose days you could be making better. I did that for Leia and Caleb, for their lives. I wrote Crystal a little note before we left and placed it near the tip. Daniel and I got up to leave, passing her on our way out. "You boys have a wonderful rest of your evening. Tell Lucia I say hi, Emilio." On the paper was written, "Use this to get little Leia and Caleb something special. Thank you for being a friend, Crystal, and thank you for being such a wonderful mother to your children." I never did find out if she read the note. After a few more hours of hanging out and walking around, both Daniel and I decided it was time to head back to the blue house on Birch Street. What we did not expect when we got there was a man with a black shirt, black pants, and black shoes to be there as well. He was standing at the doorway, yelling at Mama and Richie. "Dad!" Daniel yelled. I could see my mother mouth, "He's right there." I ran to catch up with Daniel and stand next to Mama. "Dad, stop!" He yelled at him to stop yelling at Mama. In truth, the entire confrontation was just a lot of yelling. Daniel told his father that he had run away to us on his own and that Mama and Richie let him stay with us. Daniel said that he was mad at his father for not letting him get help with his passion. Pastor Andrew yelled at my Mama for allowing a child to hide from his parents in her home. Richie and I yelled at him for yelling at her, and Mommy yelled at him for making his child feel unloved and stated that she was just trying to provide a place for him to feel safe and protected for the night. "Well, don't worry. You won't have to worry about his well-being from this point forward. Daniel, you are not allowed to have contact with this family. There will be no discussion about it. You're done being friends with that boy, and you're done spending time with his family. Now let's go home." Daniel just stood in the same place, his jewel-like eyes shattering. He couldn't believe what he'd just heard. Pastor Andrew turned to look at his son. "Daniel, now!" Daniel wiped the tears from his face and started following his father. He turned to look at me once more without his father knowing. "I'm sorry," he mouthed to me. "Me too. Goodbye, Emmy. Goodbye, Danny," I whispered to myself. It was in only a moment, one finite moment, he was gone. When I remember that moment, it goes by just as quickly as it felt, as if he'd simply been there and gone in an instant. Oh, how precious those infinite moments can be. Oh, how destructive those finite moments are. All right, so that was chapter 1. Yeah, I guess, let's sit and talk about it for a hot minute. So I like creating these dynamic characters. There's so much going on throughout the entirety of the novel. You kind of learn about Daniel through the eyes of Emilio. There's so much, he's this very mysterious character, which is perfectly valid, and that's kind of reflective of the people we know in our lives. How much do you really know about the people you spend time with? I know that even with my partner, there's things that I still don't know about him and that I'm always trying to learn. Another kind of discussion in this story is just the slow struggle of mental health and understanding, what are cries for help? What are, issues that we really need to discuss and talk about and notice and pick up on? It's so easy to just not pick up on a lot of things. But yeah, that was chapter 1 of Forgive Me, Father. There's a lot more where that came from. Chapter 2, believe me, Emilio and Daniel do not stay apart for very long. Chapter 2 follows them kind of sneaking out and seeing each other on the down low outside of, Pastor Andrew and his whole situation. But yeah, you start to learn a lot more about these people, about these characters. That's kind of my inspiration for stories, is not to create a particular idea, I guess, but to create dynamic characters and create specific scenes that feel real and realistic. You know, even in those little moments, like in the sanctuary, like it seems a bit dramatic, but I know that I've definitely had those moments where I'm like where I'm with someone, and you feel like time seems to pass on forever. And then you realize in the retrospect, like, wow, that was only, you know, a couple minutes of being together, but it feels like so much longer. Those infinite moments are just so important. Yeah, if you guys really liked this, you know, leave a like, leave a comment on what you're looking for, what you expect from the book. I have it all here. I don't have a little copy of it. This is my author copy that they gave to me so that I could look everything through and make my final edits on stuff. But if you like this, maybe I'll do another reading soon. Maybe we can do a chapter 2 and kind of do the whole story if you like. But this is for all those kids who just felt just alone, felt trapped in some small towns. I know growing up as a young queer kid in a small town, it's a lot when people look at you and differently, when people have opinions about you without even knowing you, when people like refuse to just acknowledge your presence sometimes. So this is for all of you guys to know that like there is a way, and there's, you know, there are other people out there, and that it's super important to just find your family. Sometimes it's not the people we're born with. Sometimes it's not the town we grew up in that ends up being our community. So, yeah. Thank you guys so much for watching. Yeah, Forgive Me Father is going to be coming out soon. So, thank you.